Hello, welcome everybody, and welcome to Spiral Dynamics Integral Live. Today's talk is by Nish Dubashia, who also goes by his pen name, Nish Dubashia. He's a British writer and integral thinker who has studied under some of the world's finest research mathematicians at the University of Warwick. He is an information technology professional and software developer living near London, United Kingdom. He has written 3 books: Gifted, The Story of a Young Genius; Dancing with Angels, One Man's Search for the Meaning of Life; and The Unity of Everything, a conversation with David Bohm. And Nishad is a public speaker on various spiritual subjects. He's spoken at the Humanity Rising Global Summit, the International World Unity Week Conference, and recently he was one of the featured guests at the International Science and Consciousness Conference. He's also made some very interesting videos, which you can check out online on YouTube with Peter Mary. And with that, I hand over the virtual mic to Nish.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Thank you. Okay, so I'll bring up some slides and then we'll hopefully make a start. Great. Can you all see the slide okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thank you to Veronica for inviting me to talk here today. So I'm going to be talking today about the evolution of religion using the spiral dynamics model as a guide to how human and cultural development takes place. It's a huge subject, so I can't really do it justice in 45 minutes or however long this will take. So this will be a very brief overview of how religion may be evolving based on the insights of the spiral dynamics model. So I want to begin just by trying to define what we actually mean by religion. What does it actually mean? So I'm going to start with just a working definition, and then we'll unpack that definition. So this is how I'm defining it to begin with, and we will modify and refine this definition. So religion is an entire way of life that seeks to invoke, understand, and express beliefs or experiences that are considered to represent some kind of desirable contact or relationship with a truer, higher, or deeper reality. So quite a bit there. So I'll try to unpack it briefly by just looking at the essential components of what make up this definition, which will be the working definition for this talk. So religions, generally speaking, believe that there is some kind of truer reality, higher reality, deeper reality, whether this is personal, impersonal, spirits, God, emptiness, but there's something truer, higher, or deeper than what we normally see. And typically most religions will advocate that having some kind of contact or relationship with this reality is a desirable thing. It can give us wisdom, it can give us joy, it can free us from suffering. It's just the right thing to do. Most religions have various beliefs about this truer, higher, deeper reality. And most religions believe that we can have some kind of experience or realization or union with many different ways of expressing that, of this higher, deeper, truer reality. Religions, generally speaking, have various methods by which they believe we can invoke, understand, and express these beliefs and experiences. And in its broadest possible sense, a religion is an entire way of life that includes all of the above. So it's an entire way of life that centers around these beliefs or experiences about having a true relationship with some kind of truer, higher, deeper reality. Now, I want to go back to first principles here and just see what is the bare minimum that would really need to be there in any kind of system of thought or practice to be able to call it a religion in the general sense of the term. And my suggestion here is that there are three basic principles or components or universals that need to be there. The first is what I've called spirit. Again, this is a very general term. I know it's used in many different ways across the traditions, but generally speaking, I'm calling that spirit. And by spirit, what I mean is, as we said before, there's some kind of reality that's truer, higher, or deeper than the normal, common reality that we live in most of the time. The second component or principle is what I've called self. In other words, that's us, human sentient life, whether that's the body, the mind, the soul, or all three. We have to exist in order to be able to perceive or have some kind of contact or relationship with spirit. And thirdly, there's the principle of relationship. There has to at least be the possibility of some kind of desirable contact or relationship between self and spirit. So what I'm suggesting here is that these are the three basic minimum principles that need to be there in what we could call a complete spiritual tradition: a higher reality, truer reality, spirit, self, which is the human sentient life, and some kind of possibility of a relationship between the two: spirit, self, relationship. And religion probably wouldn't mean very much if any of these were missing. If there was no spirit, there'd be nothing for us, there'd be nothing to be religious about. There'd be no object to our search. If there was no self, there'd be nobody here to be religious. We need to be there in order for religion to happen. And if there was no relationship, there'd be nothing for religion to aspire to. Some kind of relationship, contact, union, however we want to phrase it, realization needs to be at least a possibility for this religion to really have any meaning or point or purpose. So on that basis, I'm going to suggest that the working definition of religion here is it's the search for a relationship, a proper relationship between spirit and self, with the proviso that different traditions do use these terms differently. But I think that gets across the general meaning of how I'm using the term religion here. So religion is the pursuit of a right relationship between self and spirit. Now, my suggestion is going to be that if we want to unpack this further, we can think in terms of religion, any tradition, telling some kind of story, some kind of archetypal story, explicitly or implicitly, of how this right relationship between self and spirit can be lost and can be found again. So if religion is the pursuit of a right relationship between self and spirit, why do we need to have such a pursuit in the first place? Well, it's probably because we're not in right relationship between self and spirit at the moment. Some kind of rupture or dissociation has taken place, either in the distant past or in each lifetime or in each moment, between self and spirit. And why is it even worth trying to pursue such a relationship? Why is it even worthwhile? And I think that has to be, as all the religions teach, I think, that this rupture or dissociation between self and spirit can actually be healed. If we've lost our true connection or realization of spirit, we can get it back again in some sense. So we can start to see religion here as representing some kind of archetypal story that it believes plays out, at least potentially, between self and spirit. So it's a story of how self has been lost in the past or right now, how we've forgotten it or moved away from it, and how we can regain, remember, or move closer to spirit again. And so in mythical terms, this reminded me of the famous poem by Milton, From Paradise Lost to Paradise Regained. So that's going to be my kind of overarching framework within which I'm going to explore how religion evolves. It's a story, a method, a practice, a way of life that centers around this implicit belief that we've lost something that is worthwhile, that gives meaning to life, and that it can be regained again through some means or practice or belief or experience. So to unpack this story, in this archetypal story of from paradise lost to paradise regained, I'm going to suggest now there are 7, unpacking those initial 3, 7 fundamental principles that are there in most or all developed spiritual traditions. And each of these 7 fundamental principles, of course, as we move across the traditions and up and down the spiral, these different principles have been invoked and can be invoked, understood and expressed in many different ways. So the first 2 we've already seen, the principle of spirit, which is that some kind of truer, higher or deeper reality exists. And the principle of self, which is that some kind of human sentient life, body, mind and or soul exists. So I'm going to suggest now that the 3rd principle is the principle of suffering, which is that when self and spirit are not in proper alignment, self suffers. So suffering takes place at root because there's some kind of misalignment or failure to realize or wrong belief or disobedience or illusion, whatever arises, depending on how the tradition we're talking about expresses it. When self and spirit, there's some kind of disjunction between the 2. And very generally, I'm calling that the principle of suffering. The 4th principle is the principle of hope. In other words, suffering is not the end of the story. It is possible for us, in all these very different ways that the traditions teach, to bring self and spirit back into proper alignment with each other. We're not just lost to suffering. There is a way out. The 5th principle is the principle of knowledge, which is that it is possible for self to obtain knowledge about or from spirit. So we're not completely lost with nowhere to turn and nothing to know. It is possible to get some kind of knowledge of spirit, whether this is through spirit revealing itself to us, as we have in the Abrahamic traditions, or whether it's through us going through some kind of practice and realizing spirit through some kind of enlightenment experience, as we have in the Eastern traditions. And the 6th principle is the principle of salvation. And this is when essentially self and spirit realign themselves, at least to some degree. This can be salvation in the Abrahamic traditions, this can be enlightenment in the Eastern traditions, and there's other variations which we'll look at. So salvation is essentially here the solution to the problem of suffering. The principle of suffering was that self and spirit became misaligned in some way. The principle of salvation is that they realign, which is possible according to the traditions. And when they realign, suffering ends, or at least significantly reduces, whether in this life or in some proposed afterlife. And finally, the 7th and final principle is the principle of love, which is once self and spirit have realigned, once that salvation, enlightenment has been achieved, how does that manifest in daily life? It manifests as harmony, as love, as compassion, and so on. So this is the essential archetypal story as I'm presenting it: spirit, self, suffering, hope, knowledge, salvation, love. And my contention is that we find these in some form, these 7 principles, in each of the, in most of the religious traditions that we're going to be looking at. So the basic structure of my presentation is that I'm going to be drawing on the spiral dynamics model of development, and I'm going to be going briefly for each level from purple to turquoise. And I'm going to be talking very briefly about the historical emergence of that level, how these 7 principles, this archetypal story, manifests at that level, examples of religious traditions at that level, factors that precipitate the emergence of a new and higher level of development, and very briefly, in like a minute or 2, my own personal experience of religion at that level in my own life. So I'll be going through these 5 components very quickly for each of these levels from purple to turquoise, and we'll see how this story, this archetypal story that the religions tell, evolves as we move up the spiral. How does our conception of spirit evolve? How does our conception of self evolve? And so on. So very quickly, sources that I've drawn upon. So Wikipedia article on spiral dynamics, a wonderful article. There's a great website called the Spiral Dynamics Integral Netherlands, and Steve McIntosh's book, Integral Consciousness and the Future of Evolution. Okay, so purple. So very briefly, we will refer to this as the tribal level. And historical emergence, well, very roughly we can say that this started to emerge with the rise of the Homo sapien about 40,000 years ago. And it began, the earliest evidence of this is in the subtropical areas. So religion at this level. So let's have a look at the way in which religion, as defined by these 7 principles that we've briefly touched, manifests at this level. And this is just one example. There may be many other ways of doing this. So this isn't an absolute, definitive, unique way of doing this. This is just one way of looking at the way religion can evolve. So spirit at this level, at purple, this is the one way purple looks at this is the realm of the ancestors and the spirits. This is the spirit realm, where we can contact spirits, where we can, the souls of our ancestors, the spirits of our ancestors still dwell. Our sense of self at this level is what we can call the membership self. So our self here is defined by the family and by the tribe. We don't yet have a very strong, separate individual sense of ego here. The principle of suffering. Suffering arises because we are out of favor or out of alignment with the ancestors and spirits. That can bring upon us curses and so on. What shamans call soul loss can also occur at this point. The principle of hope, well, the hope here is that ancestors and spirits can be placated, healing can be performed, magic can be performed. The knowledge at this level, that comes from our tradition, from the ways of the tribe, because we can learn from our ancestors, we can learn from our community. Salvation at this level, that comes from using magic and ritual to placate our ancestors and spirits, to clear our curses, to retrieve our soul. And love at this level is about safety, loyalty to the tribe, and emotional bonding with the tribe. That's how love manifests at this level. So we can see there the purple story, the purple religious story, through these 7 principles. So examples of these, you can see this in magic, in shamanism, which is the practice, essentially the practice of interacting with the spirit world, and with traditional rituals. My personal experience of this, well, what I vaguely remember from age 2 to 4 was trying to interact with the world in a magical way, commanding the weather, commanding inanimate objects to do things, commanding people and animals to magically do things. Typical kind of games that maybe we play when we're toddlers. And factors that precipitate the higher emergence. So purple starts to wind down when we see these factors emerging that push evolution into developing a new level here. Individualism is suppressed by our submission to the tribe and by defining ourselves merely as members of a tribe. We start to find an emerging identity as a separate ego. We start to find the idea of freedom from tribal constraints to be very alluring. And the warrior culture that we see at the next level starts to look quite attractive to us. And so higher emergence occurs in due course, and we see ourselves moving to red. So historical emergence of red, around 10,000 years ago, this is when we started the development of weapons, copper processing, the early agricultural stage. And we see the earliest evidence of this in the Near East and in Mesopotamia. So again, what is religion at this level? Red religion, very generally speaking. So the spirits, these are now the power gods. So our conception of spirit has now evolved from ancestors and spirits that are very close to us. Spirit has now become that little bit more transcendent, further away from us. And we now tend to see the spiritual realm in terms of deities, lots of deities, typically, such as you see in Rome, the Roman gods, the Greek gods. These are power gods. Each deity has power. Each deity is perhaps in charge of a different part of life, a different element of life. We see this in the Hindu gods, for example. Different gods have different roles to play. At this point, our self is the ego. So we've emerged out of our identification, our membership self, which identified with the tribe, and we start to develop now our own sense of separate individual ego. And suffering occurs at this level because the ego doesn't have power. The power that the ego sees in the power gods, the ego doesn't have that power itself. So suffering at the red level is seen in terms of weakness, loss of power, lack of respect from others, dishonor from others. So the hope at this level is that the favor of the power gods can be obtained. It's possible for us at red, as separate egos, to obtain favor from these power gods that we see as spirit, and through these power gods, for some of that power to come down to us so that we can get the honor and the glory that we believe as egos we deserve. That gives us that sense of meaning in life, which is the strength of the separate person. So knowledge at this level, well, knowledge at this level tends to be obtained through trials. The warrior culture that we see at this level sees learning, development in terms of trials of strength and trials of power, which teach us to be heroes and heroines. So we go through a process of this is the path of the hero or the heroine, and we gain knowledge of power through obtaining that power and that strength through our own trials. And salvation at this level can come through pacifying the power gods to attain power, conquest, and dominance. We are given these things, we obtain these things by getting the right gods, the right deities on our side. So if we want wealth, for example, we would pacify the god of wealth or the goddess of wealth, and we would attain what that power god or power goddess has to give us as separate egos that then give us respect and honor. And love at this level, well, here love really manifests as self-love. Typically, at red, we trust only ourselves, or at least our main source of trust is ourself. Although we may give loyalty and support to others who deserve it, who've earned it through proving themselves to be loyal. So that's how love may manifest at this level. So examples of religions at this level. In ancient Hinduism, we have Vedic pujas, which still continue to this day, which are made to the planets and to the gods to pacify the gods so that we can obtain favor from the gods and we can remove weaknesses from our astrological charts, for example. That can be done by placating the planets, which are also essentially like power gods. Sacrifices can be made to the Greek and Roman gods to obtain their favors. We see this kind of path with the samurai, with whom respect and honor itself becomes a spiritual path. And we see the kind of quest for knowledge at this level in the manhood trials that we see in various cultures, where people, through great difficulty, young men typically, learn strength and power through their trials. So my personal experience of this, very briefly, was sort of ages 4 to 7 when I was in India, and I discovered Hindu myths and deities from whom I could obtain help and favors, to whom I could prove myself worthy. So age 4 to 7, I found myself going to Hindu temples and praying to Hindu gods for different favors so that I could get respect, honor, fulfill my wishes, and so on. protection. So factors that precipitate higher emergence here. Okay, the experience of parenthood, religious conversion to a higher religion, a desire for security and belonging, fear of death. These are typical factors that can bring about the need for something a bit more secure, a bit more stable, grounded in something a little bit bigger and more reliable than just the quest for the glory of our own egos, just for the quest for strength and power. And also, if our self is nothing but the ego, then a strong fear of death can also emerge at the higher end of this level, because the ego starts to realize that it's going to die. This power, this strength, this respect and honor won't last forever. And these factors can precipitate the emergence of the next level in the spiral that we can see, which is blue. So we see the historical emergence here of blue around the late agricultural period, about 3,000 years ago. And again, the earliest evidence here we see in the Middle East around what today we call Iraq. So let's have a look at religion at this blue level again by going through our 7 principles here. Spirit now becomes even more transcendent, as we see very clearly at the high end of red just how insecure life is when lived purely from the point of being a separate ego seeking power and strength and immortality in some sense. Our conception of spirit becomes even more transcendent, even more beyond this unreliable and this unreliable world of suffering. And spirit now at this level is seen as a transcendent order of some kind. This could be a personal God that we see with the Abrahamic traditions, or it can be some kind of higher oneness or some kind of emptiness that you see, for example, in the Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Our self at this level is both the body and the soul. So we're now no longer just the body, there's a soul which can survive death, perhaps, and that also becomes our focus of identity rather than just this mortal body that's seeking its own glory and power. Suffering at this level arises from some kind of non-alignment between the self and this transcendent order. The Abrahamic traditions would typically see this as sin, some kind of disobedience to the personal God. So that's how we fail to align ourselves with the transcendent order by disobeying the personal God or being in a state of sin. In the Eastern traditions, this tends to be seen more as illusion. We fail to realize or experience this, even the existence of this higher oneness or emptiness. And that can lead to a state of illusion whereby we are essentially just trapped in this manifest material world of separate things, which leads to suffering, obviously, because these separate things are going to die, including ourselves. There is hope at this level because the religions at this level teach that some kind of alignment with this transcendent order is possible. Either if we're dealing with a personal God, some kind of forgiveness and union with that personal God is possible. If we're dealing with illusion, because we have failed to realize this higher oneness, then some kind of enlightenment is possible. We can realize this oneness or emptiness and see through the illusion of the separate self and of the world of multiplicity. So knowledge at this level tends to come from some kind of revelation of this transcendent order. We're taught about this transcendent order. The transcendent order reveals itself either through prophets, Abraham, Moses, Muhammad, Jesus, or through the realization of mystics in the Eastern traditions. Mystics who have gone before us have realized the truth of this transcendent order, and they can pass it on to us, and we can learn from the revelations from these mystics. Salvation at this level is that realignment with this transcendent order. So this can come through obedience to the personal God, through forgiveness of our sins, through enlightenment, through a realization of this underlying oneness, emptiness, non-duality. And love at this level tends to show itself in the form of duty, honor, morality, loving God, loving your neighbor. So when Jesus was asked, what do I need to do to be saved? He said, the whole of the law is summarized in these two commandments: love God, love your neighbor. So essentially, love at this level is loving God, loving your neighbor. And that's how we, through that love of God and neighbor, that's how we manifest our salvation, our realignment with this transcendent order, our realization of either forgiveness or enlightenment. So examples at this level, most traditional religions would fall into this category. So we have Vedic Hinduism, Theravada Buddhism, Orthodox Judaism, Christianity, Islam in their orthodox forms. My own personal experience with this, well, I actually was a Jehovah's Witness for 11 years, from the age of 7 to the age of 18. My best friend at school was a Jehovah's Witness, and so that was the Christian group that I practiced under as a older child and throughout my teenage years. Now, factors that precipitate a higher emergence here. Well, higher education, typically. That's exactly what happened to me. I went to university at the age of 18, was exposed to far greater knowledge than I would ever have in the small village in which I lived, and that precipitated the emergence of the next level. Perceived contradictions in your group or in your belief system. You look at the people who are practicing your belief system and you realize, well, hang on a minute, they're not really practicing what they preach. Maybe they can't. Or we look at our belief system and see all kinds of contradictions in there, contradictions in the Bible, for example. We look at modern culture and we find it attractive. There's the attraction of modernism and everything that it can give. And many people feel the need for a greater financial security than perhaps prioritizing Orthodox religion in your life can give. Typically, Orthodox religions don't give that much importance to financial security. Some people may feel the need for greater security given life conditions becoming more complex. And this can then lead to the emergence of the next level. So we move to orange. So orange here, historical emergence. Well, there were strong elements of orange in ancient Greece with philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, especially Aristotle. But that kind of went underground for quite a long time, largely because of the dominance of the church, I think, in the West. But 500 years ago, we saw the Western Renaissance, and a little bit later, the Western Enlightenment, which we could see as the re-emergence and then the gradual dominance of the orange level, which is the rational level. And I think the historical emergence of this primarily began in Europe, especially Italy, in Florence particularly to begin with, and France. So let's have a look at religion at this level. Now, this is interesting because this level isn't typically seen as a religious level. It's typically seen as a very rational, scientific level, which opposes religion. But if we base our definition of religion on the 7 archetypal principles that we identified earlier, we can actually see that even this orange, modern, rational way of looking at things is, in essence, a religion of its own kind, even though it may not refer to itself or think of itself as a religion. So spirit at this level is the material and the empirical world. Typically, a scientific materialist would believe that the material empirical world, the world that is accessible to our senses and that can be analyzed with reason, is the ultimate reality. There is nothing beyond that. That's a very typical way in which we can find people at this level thinking. The self at this level is the rational mind. Reason is seen at this level as where your true self, true happiness, true success, true knowledge is to be found. That's your true self, the rational thinking mind. Suffering at this level is essentially the failure to make the best of your life in this material empirical world. So we can see suffering here in terms of poverty, illness, failure to succeed, general unhappiness. The idea that happiness is the purpose of life, our own personal happiness is the purpose of life, arises really at this level. Hope at this level, well, the hope here is that the rational mind can get control over the material world for its own benefit. Human beings can understand the natural world using reason and can exploit the natural world for the benefit of human beings. So we have a very humanistic purpose here. Everything centers around the human being. Knowledge at this level is gained through science, reason, empiricism, rationalism, atheism. These are the different knowledge bases and epistemologies that we see at this level. These are the ways we get knowledge about the material world, through science and reason, through empiricism and rationalism. And typically, not always, certainly, but typically, this level doesn't believe in a higher reality, as we saw in some of the previous levels. Atheism, or at least agnosticism, becomes quite dominant at this level. So salvation at this level is all the good things that the material world can offer us. Health, wealth, progress. The human beings can just progress endlessly. Just the sheer joy of living. This is the only life we get. Make the best of it. Make the best of every moment. And freedom from superstition. The human race has now grown up. This is the orange view. The human race has now grown up. We've got rid of all of our superstitions. Now we're now in the adult stage of human history. And love at this level is all about mutual respect. You respect me, I'll respect you. We award achievements, and progress and respect is largely earned through merit. Achieve things, merit your respect and admiration in this world. So examples of paths, even religions in this general sense at this level: atheism. There's even a church for atheists now in London. So atheism has almost officially become a religion now, at least in that church. Naturalism, which is the belief that only natural forces and laws operate in the cosmos. Objectivism, which was in a very extreme form put forward by Ayn Rand, and this was her definition: the concept of man as a heroic being with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity and reason as his only absolute. So we're all heroes and heroines. The purpose of our life is happiness. Our life should be productive, and reason is the only absolute truth. And another more recent form of orange religion is ontological mathematics, where the belief is that everything is mathematics. Everything is just this perfect, rational system of thought enshrined in maths. And anything that's not maths is effectively an illusion. Mathematics is the highest truth. So my personal experience of this was when I went to university, my Jehovah's Witness beliefs fell to pieces. Took about 2 weeks of sitting in the university library and just reading all day. And that effectively ushered in a period of atheism for me, which lasted about 4 years, 18 to 22. So again, as we reach the higher end of orange, various factors come into play that precipitate a higher emergence again. Metaphysical experiences. People start to maybe have experiences of oneness with nature and start to wonder what that's all about. People can start getting bored with merely material pursuits. They want something more. Just buying things and cars and houses when you're really successful at it can start to lack interest. The counterculture, which we'll see in full bloom in the next level, starts to look attractive. And as we start to achieve and even overachieve our orange materialistic humanistic goals, we can start to feel or sense the loss of meaning and purpose. Is this it? We may ask ourselves, what's the meaning of all this? Buying a bigger house and getting another promotion at work, is that is that all there is? We start to lose our sense of meaning and purpose, and we can at this stage move into some kind of existential crisis. And that can bring about the emergence of the next level, which in spiral dynamics we call green. So the historical emergence at green, well, at its root, I think we can find the beginnings of this way of thinking in the romantic and existential movements that started about 200 years ago in Western Europe, primarily around sort of France and Germany. So what is the religion at green? How does religion manifest at green? Well, again, let's go through our 7 principles. And again, this is just one example of it, as all of these have been, but this isn't the only way religion manifests at this level. This is just one example that I'm giving here. So spirit at green is the harmony of the universe. We look around the universe and we see how beautiful it is. Everything fits together everything fits together harmoniously. There's a harmony, there's a beauty, there's an order, there's a flow. And that flow of the cosmos now starts to be seen in spiritual terms. We've kind of outgrown the idea, perhaps, of this transcendent God who's going to look after us and who we have to obey. I think that was largely deconstructed in orange. But as we move into green, the idea of the sacred starts to explicitly return. But now it's within the cosmos. We don't leave the cosmos now to find it. We actually start to find the sacred within the cosmos itself. In other words, we move towards more of a pantheistic or panentheistic experience of the world rather than this more theistic experience that we had at blue. So self at this level is again the human being, but now our life starts to be seen as sacred. We are sacred selves living in this sacred, harmonious universe. And suffering arises because we live out of harmony with the universe. We're not living in a way that is in harmony with nature. We're not living in a way that is in harmony with the cosmos. We're not living in harmony with other people. And that disorder, disharmony, that creates suffering for us. So hope at this level is that this disharmony can be healed. We can actually achieve harmony again. We can re-establish that harmony, which was our original state, our true natural state. Natural is a big word at this level. We want to rediscover our natural way of being. So what is knowledge at this level? Well, this level tends to be quite relativistic. There's lots of different paths. There's lots of different truths. Each person has their own truth. We're all on the same path leading to the same goal. At this level, typically we'll use reason as we did at orange, but we'll also use our feelings a lot more. We don't rely purely on reason. We get back in touch with our feelings and we learn to trust our feelings. Reason and feelings together can give us knowledge of this harmonious universe. We can get knowledge here through introspection, through looking within. We can find knowledge through our relationships with people. We can find knowledge through deep listening. It's all about dialogue, listening deeply to what others have to say, sitting in nature, listening deeply to trees and rivers and mountains and animals to get back in touch with that harmonious flow of the cosmos that we've lost. Salvation at this level, equality between human beings. Typically at this level, we find social justice warriors. We want to rediscover, re-find that justice for everybody so that people who are being treated badly, who have been marginalized, can have all the same opportunities and even outcomes that the privileged have. Harmony between people, equality, love, genuine love between people. At this level, we look for our calling in life. What is it that we're meant to be doing? What does the universe want me to do? Sharing with others, tolerance of other people's points of view, tolerance of other people's paths, going with the flow, living in the moment. These are the kind of ways in which green can cognize or conceptualize salvation, which is essentially self realigning with spirit. And how does love manifest at this level? We realize the oneness of humanity. Typically, We don't worry too much about different races, different religions anymore. Humanity is one. We feel compassion for all sentient beings, including animals and plants. We feel empathy for others, sensitivity towards others, a deep connection with others. So examples in the religious traditions where we see green, either full-blown green or at least elements of green. The Indian mystic Ramakrishna, who lived in the 19th century, now he taught that all religions are one. All religions are paths to the same goal. And he actually, in his own life, practiced several different religions and achieved what he felt was enlightenment through all of them. That's a very green spiritual path to follow. Aspects of Mahayana Buddhism. In Mahayana Buddhism, we see what is known as the Bodhisattva ideal, which is that we achieve enlightenment for ourselves, but we postpone going back into nirvana. We postpone that until we can help everyone else to be enlightened as well. Our own enlightenment has no meaning unless everybody else is enlightened with us. It's the enlightenment of the whole human race together, not just of me as an individual. We see it in philosophical Taoism, in the writings of Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, which is all about, their writings are very much about finding that harmony with the Tao, which is the way of the cosmos, the way of the universe. And we see it in Eckhart Tolle, the best-selling mystic of all time, whose books The Power of Now and A New Earth have sold millions and millions of copies all over the world. And I think that's because he's tapping into this green notion of living in the moment, going with the flow, equality, calling, sharing, tolerance. He's managed to plug into that in this unique and extraordinary way. My own personal experience, well, in my early to mid 20s, I studied and practiced for a while under various teachers in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition and in the Taoist tradition. And I was very involved in the teachings of Krishnamurti, whose teachings are also very orange/green. And factors that precipitate higher emergence at this level. So green looks really good. Why would we actually even need to develop higher than green? So there are some factors that precipitate the emergence of something higher here. There can be a dissatisfaction with the counterculture to give meaning. Even this countercultural movement that you see here that typifies green can lead to dissatisfaction. Can this counterculture really heal society? Are we really, is this 5% or 10% of counterculturals really going to be able to have very much of an effect on the remaining 90% who are still operating at red, blue, and orange levels? Are we just being idealistic, utopian, if we think that that's going to be the case? Green has its own pathologies. If my own point of view is just as valid as anybody else's, then nobody else has any right to tell me what to do or what to believe. It's my path. Don't you dare tell me what to do. Narcissism. One of the pathologies that can come out of green here is narcissism. And the other pathology that can come out of green is nihilism. Your path is equal to mine. All paths are good. Every relative path is equally good as every other. If we really take that to its logical conclusion, that means that effectively there is no absolute. There's nothing to really ground us. There's no real ultimate meaning in life except this never-ending meaning of contexts in every direction. And that can lead to a real feeling and experience of nihilism. And also what can happen as we move to the higher end of green is a desire for a greater integration with other views that have gone before us. And so I think this is what starts to lead into the next level, which we can call the yellow level, the integral level. So very roughly, we can see this integral level really starting to emerge in some strength about 50 years ago with the birthing of systems and integral thinking. And typically, originally that was in Western Europe and in the USA. So religion at this level, so spirit. Now at yellow, we start for the first time to really see things in terms of evolution and development. This model itself, the spiral dynamics model that I'm using today, has probably likely come out of yellow cognition. So spirit at this level is the evolving cosmos. the whole universe, the whole cosmos, but now seen in terms of these different levels of development. As different aspects of the cosmos become more and more complex, both at the cosmic level and at the individual level. The self at this level is what we could call the compound individual. So as individuals, we are a compound of all the levels of development that we have already achieved. If one is at a certain level of evolution, of development, the previous levels that one has previously attained are still, in some sense, within that person and accessible. So each individual is a compound individual made up of all the levels of development that they have so far achieved, and those levels are, in some sense, within that person. So suffering at this level is often seen as an unhealthy or an insufficient development. Either the level of development that we have reached has taken a very unhealthy form. So for example, we might be at the blue level, but instead of following a healthy tradition, we're following some really dangerous sect. So that would be a very unhealthy development. Or maybe there is an insufficient development. We might be at a particular level of development, suffering in some way, and the way to resolve that suffering might be to develop to the next level. So suffering here is seen largely in terms of development. And the hope here is that translation and transformation are possible. So by translation, what I mean is to translate our current level of development to a more healthy level of development, that same level, but in a more healthy form. And transformation would be to develop to an entirely new level of development altogether, because that level is no longer working for us. We've fulfilled or exhausted everything that level can do for us. Knowledge at this level is what we could call an integral epistemology. So we have very different ways of knowing at this level, depending on which level of development we're actually plugging into. And if you're familiar with Ken Wilber's integral theory, then this is plugging into the 4 quadrants. We've got first, second, third, and fourth person ways of knowing. And it's at yellow that we really start to clearly differentiate between these 4, explicitly differentiate and recognize these 4 very different ways of knowing and interacting epistemologically with the world around us. So salvation at this level comes from translating and transforming. Move to a healthier level of development where you are, move to a higher level of development if your current level is no longer working for you. And love at this level is give people space for their own unique evolutionary journey. We're all at different levels, we're all on different paths, which is what we realized at green. But at green, there was no sense of development. So every path and every point of view has equal validity. And that could lead, as we saw, to nihilism or narcissism. With yellow, we start to see that there's actually a pattern that is connecting these different viewpoints, and that pattern is the pattern of development. And love and respect at this level manifests as our ability and willingness to give people space to be at the level they want to be and to take their own evolutionary journey in their own way. So examples of thinkers and traditions at this level. So Sri Aurobindo, who was an Indian mystic about 100 years ago, slightly less than 100 years ago, and he wrote exhaustively about evolution in the context of the Hindu tradition and how enlightenment can be seen as lying at the end of this process of evolving through different levels of evolution. We can see that in the writings and teachings of the more modern teacher Andrew Cohen, who taught a form of development, a form of spirituality that he called evolutionary enlightenment. We can see that in Christianity in Teilhard de Chardin, who developed an evolutionary form of Christianity, where he taught or speculated that the whole universe is moving towards what he called an omega point, which is where evolution has its end. And that omega point is drawing the whole cosmos up to itself, both individually and cosmically. Ken Wilber's integral theory, probably the most well-known form of thinking at this level, and all the various integral movements that we can see happening in different spheres, economic, spiritual, planetary. So my personal experience here, sort of age 25 to 40, total absorption in the integral theory of Ken Wilber, which completely captivated me when I first discovered it in my mid-20s. It's pretty much all I talked about and thought about and wrote about for 15 years, boring everybody senseless around me. And for a while, I was briefly involved with the teachings of Andrew Cohen, who taught an evolutionary path as well. So, factors that precipitate higher emergence. As even yellow starts to wind down because of these different factors here. We see a desire to go beyond mere concept and intellect. Yellow can be very conceptual. It can be very much in the thinking mind. It can be a lot about it can be about models. So it can start to seem a bit abstract eventually. We can have a desire to reconnect with our body, reconnect with our emotions. We can have a desire to reconnect with the community. Yellow is very much of an individualistic based level. And we can start to feel a real attraction for the transpersonal. At the high end of yellow, we can see maybe that the very personal, what we would call the personal, starting to wind down. And some kind of transpersonal realization or vision starts to really attract us. That goes beyond merely the yellow thinking here. And this can lead to what will be the final level in this presentation. Probably the final level we have any real solid evidence of at the moment, which is the turquoise level, which I've called the holistic level. So the historical emergence here, this is very difficult to pin down. So very generally, I'm saying sort of holism and collective consciousness, inquiries into these areas about 30 years ago, again in Western Europe and the USA. So let's have a look at religion at this level, again looking at our 7 principles, that story that we've seen at every level. So spirit, here spirit, again it's the cosmos, we're still panentheistic, and we see the cosmos here as a holistic organism. The cosmos is alive. The cosmos is one unified, holistic, sentient being almost, either as a metaphor or even literally. Some people would hold that. And the self is the human being as a holistic organism living in a holistic society. So at this level, we're seeing wholes within wholes within wholes. The organism is a body-mind whole living in a society, which is a whole, which is part of the cosmos, which is a whole. Suffering at this level can be seen as an inadequate integration in the human holistic organism and in the holistic society. So it's our failure to realize the true holistic nature of the organism of society that brings about suffering, as this level sees it. Hope at this level is that integration is possible. There are ways to bring about a higher integration of the organism and a higher integration of society. Knowledge at this level, we start to move into different ways of knowing here, holistic ways of knowing, transpersonal ways of knowing, energetic ways of knowing. We start to maybe get a sense of more subtle energies at this level. So higher ways of knowing that perhaps weren't even available at yellow start to emerge at this level. We might even be moving towards what eventually we might even be able to call a fifth person cognition. So salvation at this level, it's all about integration here. We're the different aspects of the human being, cognition, emotion, instinct, energy, spirit, all of these different aspects of who we are, they can be integrated. And it's that movement towards the integration of these different aspects of the human being that represents our salvation or even enlightenment at this level. And love at this level, well, here we can start to feel a conscious, energetic connection with others. We can actually feel others energetically and even as parts of our own energy system at the pinnacle of our relationships with others here. So examples of turquoise religions, at least in part, subtle energy practices. So we see these in the Hindu Kundalini system in the Tibetan Buddhist Tummo systems. Here we're working with subtle energies in the body, and working with those subtle energies can help, working with our chakras, for example, can help to bring about a higher energetic and eventually even transpersonal integration of the body-mind organism. We see elements of turquoise in the body-mind therapies, such as Rolfing and Gestalt therapy. And we see turquoise playing a strong role in what we could call the more holistic forms of religion. We see interconnections between people and objects and parts of the cosmos. We start to move into esoteric religion. We start to move into much more universal ways of looking at things. And my own personal experience, sort of age 40 plus, I became heavily involved with body-mind therapies, Rolfing, Gestalt therapy. I became a student of a teacher called Adi Dar, who certainly in his early years was teaching very much, I think, from a turquoise point of view. And my own practice has tended to be very much with Kundalini yoga. So that, I think, is how religion can manifest through these 8 levels, looking at religion in terms of this story. So just to sum up now quickly, and then I'll come to the end of the presentation. I'm going to draw briefly now on the work of Michael Commons and Francis Richards, who have worked with what they call stages of hierarchical complexity. And I'm going to very quickly go through these levels again from blue to turquoise, just so that we can see at a glance on one screen how thinking, the different forms of thinking that evolve and develop as we move up the spiral, specifically in relation to religion, in the context of religion. So at blue, we have concrete operational thinking. So this is very simple, non-critical religious belief and creed. So we simply believe. We believe what our authorities and traditions and scriptures tell us, no critical thinking. The transition from blue to orange, the abstract thinking, the capacity for abstract thinking arises, and we can now start to, we now have the capacity to start questioning and doubting things with respect to religious beliefs and creeds. We then move into orange proper, and we can refer to that as formal operational thinking. So here we apply critical thinking to religious beliefs and creeds, and these creeds become deconstructed by reason and by evidence, empirical evidence, such as historical evidence or scientific evidence. Orange moves into green. We start to develop systematic thinking. So religions now are seen as worldviews. Each worldview has its own governing assumption, which cannot itself be proven from within that worldview itself. Any worldview, including the scientific worldview, rests on some kind of faith that that worldview itself cannot prove or demonstrate. And this ties in with a theorem in maths called Gödel's theorem, which is that any system of thought has to have something that's taken on faith. Effectively, that's what it's saying. Then we move into green thinking, meta-systematic cognition. Here we see all these different religious worldviews as different systems that exist alongside each other. But we don't perceive at this point any kind of governing pattern or narrative that is connecting them. They're just lots of different paths, rather like meals on a menu, and we can choose the one that we like. At yellow, we move into paradigmatic cognition. Here we start to see that we have these different religious systems, but now we start to see a developmental or paradigmatic pattern connecting these different systems. These different systems are not just arbitrarily arising out of nowhere. These different systems are connected with a pattern, and that pattern is the pattern of development. And when we move into turquoise thinking, we move into what Commons and Richards call cross-paradigmatic cognition. So now we start to see that across this entire spectrum of religious development, we see these same universal fields that are repeatedly recurring in different forms across this entire spectrum. And that's exactly what I've done today with these 7 principles: spirit, self-suffering, hope, knowledge, salvation, love. We can see these as these universal fields, these universal insights that repeatedly recur in different ways across this entire spectrum of development. And that's what Commons and Richards refer to as this turquoise cross-paradigmatic cognition. And now, just to be really flash, high turquoise cognition is what Commons and Richards refer to as meta cross-paradigmatic performative recursive cognition. And anyone who knows what that means can send me an email. Now that is basically when we clearly see the way that these patterns, these fields that occur across these different levels, what are the dynamics that occur between these fields? How are these different forms of the universal fields themselves connecting and progressively changing shape? So somebody operating from high turquoise will look across these levels and will see very clearly how these different insights, spirit, self, suffering, hope, and so on, are actually morphing into these different shapes as they evolve up the levels. We can see that there are these very specific level-specific shapes all the way up the spiral, that are effectively a vertical series of each of these fields, which is effectively what we've done today. So the summary, and then I will finish. Rather than assuming that religion is simply something that's behind us and something that's archaic, when we see that religion has underlying principles and features, then we can see that something like religion occurs in different ways, reimagined ways, newly composed ways at every human level, including integral. Religion never goes away. It's just completely reformulated as we develop. So religion itself is effectively a field that we see across every paradigm. And I think this is mainly because our actual underlying existential situation, which is our lack of connection between self and spirit, never goes away. We just reformulate that lack of connection in different ways. And if we can understand this, then I think we can be truly integral in terms of honoring everything that's preceded and everything that is to come as different shapes of the same field that is present everywhere. So when seen from a turquoise perspective, we can define religion as a series of universal fields that take different forms or shapes across different evolving perspectives. So in blue-orange language, now you may notice that when I've named these fields, spirit, self, suffering, hope, I'm actually using blue-orange language. Spirit, self, suffering, hope, knowledge, salvation, love. This is blue-orange terminology. I could have used completely different terms if I wanted to center myself in green or yellow. The fields in themselves can't be spoken in terms of words, because as soon as you actually take a word, you've situated yourself at a level. Now we can continue to use terms like spirit, self, suffering, but their meanings deepen and have different contexts as we move into second tier thinking. So taken together, to finish off now, taken together, these fields can be seen to tell a story of loss and redemption, an archetypal story field that progressively changes shape via a process of recursive inaction across increasingly complex paradigms. So looking back across these 8 archetypal stories that we've looked at very briefly today, whichever form of this archetypal story you can relate to the most, which could be anywhere from purple to turquoise theoretically, may be an indication of where your or my line of spiritual development is currently centered. And I think that's it for today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nish. Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you so much, Nish. And thank you all for joining us today.